Hello and welcome to Presenting, a podcast where we chat about various topics related to role-playing games, typically Paizo products such as Pathfinder and Starfinder, but also others. I'm John Godek, and with me today is Michael Rekun. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, greetings and salutations, all and sundry.
So Michael is the creative director of the Luminant Age campaign setting for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, as well as a longtime freelance author and game designer for Paizo with over 30 credits to his name. He's a Russian-speaking Ukrainian American currently residing in China. Michael has a PhD in diplomatic history and is also a published historian. You can reach Michael on Twitter at NeoTiamat, as well as learn more about Luminant Age at Luminant A on Twitter. So, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to becoming an RPG author with nearly 200,000 words written for Paizo?
So, briefly, I am what happens when you expose impressionable young children to libraries. All right, to explain. So, I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, back when it was still part of the Soviet Union. But my family moved to America when I was about yay high. This is when the wall fell and all of those exciting things happened.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about my family is that we're kind of we're old school Soviet intelligentsia types, which basically means we were all completely obsessed with books. My grandmother was a professor of Russian literature at Lviv State University. Growing up, we had entire walls of bookshelves. Dinner conversation was basically, there's mom eating supper with a book in front of her nose. There's dad eating supper with a book in front of his nose. And here's little Misha eating supper, book in front of my nose. That's kind of how it goes. So growing up, I was always reading, always interested in books, all of that. Then along comes one fine day in 2005, which is, good God, that's longer ago than I like to think about, honestly.
Almost 18 years ago.
Yeah, so teenage Michael was wandering around Barnes and Nobles, bored out of his ever-loving skull, and he comes across a book called I Strad by P.N. Elrod. Now, I kind of had a dim view of tie-in literature, still do somewhat, but I was 17, I was goth as hell, and okay, it's a book written from the perspective of the bad guy who's also a vampire. Okay, you have my attention, book. Let's see if you can hold up. Turns out it did. So read it, got interested in it. We had good mix of epic gothic melodrama, pitch black humor. So got interested, started kind of getting okay, let's follow up on this. What's this whole Ravenloft business? Looks interesting. Being shy and standoffish, I know it's hard to imagine now, at that age, I went online. I was like, okay, let's look around forums, websites, what can I find? And I made my way to the Fraternity of Shadows web forum, which was and is kind of the that is the place for Ravenloft fan stuff, kind of online. I joined a couple of play-by-post games, which, in the manner of play-by-post games then and now, promptly crashed and burned. At which point I was like, okay, well, all right, Michael, if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. So I started running my own games, and thus acceded to that epic role of the forever GM, which I've not given up in the 15 years since. Got involved in various fan projects, got involved in a scary amount of homebrewing. if you wander around the fraternity's kind of quote the Raven fan books, my name pops up there on a fair number of issues. And just kind of kept running games, kept doing homebrew stuff, kept on doing fan stuff. Until around 2017 when networking magic happened. And a person of my acquaintance got hired by Paizo. And they're like, okay, we need people. Michael, you have the gift of gab. Will you write for us? I'm like, sure. And the rest is, as they say, history. I started writing for Paizo in the last days of first edition. I did a few, like basically everyone back then. I started off on the companion series, so they can like
Hmm.
give me,
Right.
here is 1,500 words. Please write something coherent. And I'm like, coherency. I can achieve this. And did that. Did a few back matter. Well, did one back matter, a couple of bestiary stuff. Uh, Initially, I was working with Eleanor Farron, Louis Loza, and Ron Lundeen. And that meant that when second edition rolled around, guess who was on the ground floor? This guy.
Nice.
And so I was one of the first people involved, one of the first freelancers involved. And things just kind of spiraled out from there. Overall, let me think. I have over 30 Paizo credits at this point, with a couple more in the pipeline. I've written, oh good lord, 2 modules. I am the cover author on the Dark Archive book.
Hmm.
I've done some back matters. I've done Pathfinder 1, Pathfinder 2, Starfinder. Pretty much I have written all things except for Adventure Pass at this point. I am inescapable.
So, how did you become so prolific, writing dozens for, you have dozens of credits for both Pathfinder and Starfinder now? That's a lot. And you're talking 5 years, right? From start
Yeah,
to doing
probably
that.
give or take. At my peak, it's actually really the peak of it was like for about 3 years when I was writing 50,000 words a year. It's
Hmm.
gotten a little bit lesser now since my day job has picked up, but um, basically, I am just that good. Or okay, right,
Okay.
hubris to one side.
Yeah.
As you can tell, lack of ego is not one of my issues. So, simply put, I tend to view writing as a skill set. It is something which is a skill which can be learned, can be trained, learned by observation, learned by practice, and relative to kind of your typical person, even to your typical freelancer, I have an unusual amount of practice, training, and kind of observation in writing skills before I ever got to Pathfinder. So,
Hmm.
like, to start with, so, writing is something you can learn through observation. As I mentioned earlier, my family are all absolutely book obsessed. And this has stayed the same. If you believe Goodreads, I don't know if you believe Goodreads, I average about 100 books a year.
Wow.
I
Nice.
read a lot,
Yeah.
and this means that I have like a lot of examples of plot structures, cool
Mm.
looking scenes, little character snippets, particularly memorable quotes or lines, all kind of jumbled up in my brain.
Mhm.
I think lots of freelancers are like that, but it definitely means that I kind of have kind of a head start on all the stuff. Whenever
Mhm.
I'm given some kind of part, like, okay, what have I read which might be relevant to this? What stuff falls out of my brain? Like when I was doing, let's say, the Mbeke dwarves for Lost Omens 1 The Expanse, I was like, okay, dwarves, what can I do? You know what? I like ideas of civic citizenship, and let's do something with the Romans, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. I have actual formal training in research and in writing. So, as kind of noted, I am a trained historian. I have a PhD in history. And while there's a lot of ways you can kind of describe what a historian, kind of like anyone in the humanities, does, one reasonably accurate description would be somebody who reads stuff, thinks about it, and writes about it.
Mm-hmm.
So back when I was first starting my degree, like my first advisor, trial by fire. Like, here's 1,000 pages of history book. Read this by next week and expect to talk about it.
Yep. Yep. I've had seminars like that, I will say. Yeah.
Yep, it was an experience, trial by fire. I barely survived, but God, did I know history afterwards. So by the time I even kind of got to that very first Paizo assignment, I'd already written grant applications, project reports. I'd already finished by that point my 100,000 word dissertation, which was in the
Mm-hmm.
process of turning into an actual book back then, and they're getting published in 2018. I kind of I basically had like a lot of actual formal training in how to write and how to write to a deadline and how to write kind
Mm-hmm.
of coherently and to a reasonable level of skill. And then there's just like my background in homebrew stuff and particularly play by post, because how does a play by post work? Or at least the way I always end up
Right.
doing it. It's you go like 2 or 3 times a week. I go online and I have to write out a couple of 100 words post of like whatever in response to whatever is going on. You do that for about 15 years and you're going to get very good at impromptu writing.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think over the years, I'm, good God, I've probably written 6 or 7 thousand posts, which probably works out to easily 1 million words, if not two. Add to that 100,000 words of homebrew stuff, and basically it just means that kind of writing is a skill, and it's one in which I have a unusual amount of practice. That's basically what it comes down to. I have written
Mm-hmm.
a lot
Mm-hmm.
of stuff.
Yes, you have. So you mentioned your degree, a PhD in diplomatic history.
Yes.
Um, I'm familiar with PhDs. I have a PhD myself. I understand the research part of it. I don't know what diplomatic history is, though. Could you explain that a little bit for myself and the audience?
Okay, so diplomatic history is okay, so obviously it's the history of diplomacy, which is a fancy way of saying it's the history of the international relations between states, or basically how do
Mm-hmm.
countries interact with one another. So my particular specialty is in 19th century Russian foreign policy, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much going from kind of the Crimean War up until World War One. What was the Russian Empire trying to do? What were its goals? How did it set out to accomplish those goals? Does it succeed? Mostly not. Why not? What happens? What doesn't happen? So diplomatic history is pretty much kind of the study of just of the non-military interactions
Mm-hmm.
of countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, like most kind of academics, and as I'm sure you know, it's like we all have like little penumbras of specialization. So
Yes.
my deep specialty is Russian foreign policy, especially in the Balkans.
Right.
My book, my dissertation, transformed into a book, was How Russia Lost Bulgaria, 1878 to 1886, Empire Unguided, which is basically a fancy kind of account of Russian Bulgarian relations during this time period. results in, like, what is Russia trying to do? Make an ally in the Balkans. Did Russia succeed? Good God, no. Why not? Well, it's a story which involves a couple of assassination attempts, some coup attempts, some successful coups, two wars, scandal all over the place. That's my core focus. And then kind of spreading out, I'm reasonably well versed in like all aspects of uh, Russian history. Let's say after Catherine the Great,
Hmm.
I know my way around 19th century Europe. I more or less know like the history of like how does diplomacy, how do international relations actually work. I know enough international relations theory. There's stuff like realism, uh, the international law approach, constructivism, to at least get myself into trouble. We'll say.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's basically what it comes down to.
So this is interesting. I have a niece who is very much into something similar. She's into international relations, and she actually wanted to study diplomatic history as well.
Oh,
Her specialization is like relations between Japan and China in like 1830 something or another, right? So very
oh,
similar kind of idea that you have
yep.
there. Where did you go for your degree? Because that's something I don't know.
So I bounced around a decent bit. I did my undergraduate at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst,
Hmm.
then bounced over to Tufts University for my
Okay,
master's degree.
so pretty close.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've always said Massachusetts. And then
yeah,
for my actual PhD, which Tufts didn't have a PhD program at that time, I
right.
went to a Northeastern University and
Oh,
worked
okay.
under Professor Harlow Robinson there.
Hmm.
So I've mostly stayed in and around the Massachusetts area.
Right.
My friends will tell you that I am a staunch New England chauvinist.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I went to school in New England, so I can
Oh,
kind of appreciate that in Connecticut.
where in New
So,
England?
the United States Coast Guard Academy. So I was a Coast Guard officer for a bunch of years. So
Oh, fancy.
that's where my undergraduate's from. And my niece is actually in the DC area, and I said, why don't you go to Georgetown or American University or something down there? They don't have her specialization, so she wants to come out to the West Coast of the U.S. to go
Yep.
somewhere like Berkeley or something. I said, well, good luck getting into Berkeley. That's a tough nut to crack. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
I have one friend who I think did go to Berkeley for undergrad. She is
mhm.
scary smart, like, does genetic stuff. I don't understand it.
Yeah,
I'm a mere historian. I deal with like simpler things.
yeah, yeah. I went to Michigan for a master's and PhD. So it's a good school, but it's not Berkeley. It's not Berkeley. So, all right. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that. You kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to ask you anyway because it's one of my questions. How is the research that you've done as part of your PhD, kind of learning that process? You talked about the writing. How's the research though helped you with your freelance writing and game design?
Um, okay, a couple of ways I'd say. First, I guess, is just the simple skill transfer. In other words, part of what you need to do to be kind of a historian or anyone else in the humanities is you kind of get to be really good at opening the book, reading through it quickly, and figuring out kind of what are the key ideas, key themes, summaries, and so on.
Hmm.
Which is a fairly useful thing when you are dealing with something like Pathfinder, where there are many years of lore prior, kind of multiple previous
Hmm.
books, and so forth.
Right.
So it does kind of give me a bit of a leg up in the sense of just I can pretty quickly figure out, okay, what's happened before and what do I need to, let's say, update if I'm dealing with like this particular material in the second edition, let's say. But moreover, more than that, it's honestly just so as tabletop RPG writers, we are often kind of called upon to create new settings, new worlds, new countries, and so on. Um, Even in Pathfinder, which is a pretty established setting, they're still always making up kind of new stuff. And when the time comes, like, oh, we need to make or we need to detail in more depth some kind of society or setting or civilization, I happen to know of a lot of like current examples. I can think like,
Hmm.
oh, what kind of like weird society does this thing remind me of, or what can I do which like
Right.
has what peculiar historical influences can I bring in? Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
for instance, let's kind of go back to the Mbeka dwarves in Wang Expanse, because that's one of the few times I got a chance to build a society completely from scratch. And I was like,
Right.
okay,
Right.
where can I bring in some stuff in? So I was like, you know what? Rome, Roman Republic. So they've got, for example, elements like there was an ancient, well, ancient for them, war of like some one of their kings went mad, bad, and thoroughly wrong. It's like, can you say Tarquin Superbus? Things like that, or elective kinships. So basically, just means that I have a lot of bits and pieces of historical example which I can use to help build new societies, new countries, new settings.
Right. And not only can you build new, but you can also make them coherent because you
Yeah,
understand how the system works and it's interlocked. So when you build a new system, you make sure you have those
yeah,
pieces fitting
yeah.
together properly as well, I imagine. Yeah.
Verisimilitude, yeah. Like
Yes.
there's
Very good.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned your day job's keeping you busier. What is your day job in China as a American trained Russian speaking Ukrainian? What are you doing in China?
Tormenting students. Okay,
Oh,
so
I
I
enjoy that. Yes.
yes, it's lots of fun, like playing mind games with teenagers. Okay, so in actual fact, I am a history teacher at an international school here in Shenzhen, in Guangdong
Mm,
province. So, okay, so rewind a little bit. So, back in ye olden days, I completed my PhD. I was like, okay, all right, Michael, now you need to get a job. And academia was not an enticing prospect at that time. I have this weird thing where like I like eating 3 times a day and like other luxuries like that. So like no,
yeah.
adjuncting
Okay.
not happening. So I
Yeah.
thought I'd go. Let's go into secondary education. Looked around a bunch of schools in America. They all kept asking awkward questions like, "Have you ever worked with teenagers before?" It's like, So one thing led to another, and I kind of went to China because there is a lot of demand for teachers, English speaking teachers here. I kind of bumped around for a couple of years teaching English or working as a homeroom teacher. One gloriously terrible year, I was a third grade homeroom teacher. Never again.
Oh man,
Never.
not for me. No way. Not gonna do that.
I see. Basically, they offered me a lot of money,
Yeah.
and it was only later that I realized they did not offer me enough money. But in any case, finally, I've arrived at my current place, and kind of by hook, by crook, and by a certain dint of kind of sharp elbows, I now actually teach in my specialty. I teach modern
Right.
world history, AP world history, and international baccalaureate diploma program history. So basically, I
Nice.
am that super fancy history teacher that always goes on digressions and like torments teenagers with like weird stories about. So, kids, today we're gonna talk about guillotines. My, my students
Nice.
are always absolutely terrified of falling asleep in my class. I don't know why.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, so
So, how's your? I presume you speak Mandarin there. I don't know what they
and
speak in that province.
so funnily enough, okay, so despite being ostensibly bilingual, I'm actually kind of terrible at languages. But the
Okay,
yeah, but the school actually is it's an English speaking school,
right.
and
I figured
our
that, but I was just wondering to live there, you probably had to pick up a little bit.
I mean, I can say yes, no, hello, and I can curse in Mandarin. That's useful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think most of our student body is actually like we got some Chinese, we got massive number of Koreans, Americans, Russians. We got everybody. So
Right. Right. Right.
plus these days I live in Sheko, which is like expat central around here.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And I in China also don't they teach English like going up through grade school for a lot of them as well?
Yeah. So actually, my very first jobs was in Chinese government schools where I was teaching English to like just kind of regular Chinese students for a while. I started
Oh,
off in Zhengzhou in the central provinces, and only more recently came down to the coast. So, yep,
nice.
they teach. There's a lot of people around here who can speak at least a little bit of English.
Right. Yeah, I taught in Denmark for a while and I loved it there because everybody in Denmark pretty much knows how to speak English and enjoys speaking it with you for practice. So it's like, oh, you said hello. I'm going to speak to you in English. If you say hi, I'm going to speak to you in Danish. It's like, oh, once I learned that trick, oh, it's all easy, all easy.
Excellent. Yep,
So,
sounds about right.
how's the gaming environment there? Right, you've been there for a number of years. Do you game locally with anybody?
Not particularly. So
Okay,
strange though it may seem, I do try and keep a little bit of a separation between Michael the game writer and Michael the teacher. So it's like
hmm.
not exactly a deep dark secret, but it's like little separate spheres.
I did until I got tenure. I did that too. Once I got tenure, I started telling people, "Yeah, I'm running all these games, doing game design." They were all excited about it. I'm thinking, why was I worried about that? So
Well, so
yeah,
I will say the one thing I do is I have the cover of one of my Pathfinder modules like up on like the on a poster board behind my desk, and I said, like, okay,
nice.
how long does it take students to notice this thing? Last year, I had one teenager ask me in tones of absolute shock around May, Dr. Rekun, you do gaming stuff? It was just like,
Yes,
hey, open your eyes, little Timmy. Open your
yeah,
eyes. Yeah.
yeah. I used to be a competitive video gamer too, and when I tell my students
Ooh.
that, they're like, "What?
Yeah.
You're too old." Yeah, back in the day, we did play still.
Yeah. Oh,
So that's
and I sometimes tell my students like, I have characters older than you.
yes, nice.
Yeah.
So one of I had interviewed Andrew Mullen a couple months ago, and so you all are working on this new thing called Luminant Age. So he's told us a little bit about it. Can you tell me what the genesis was for this Luminant Age campaign?
Okay, so I mean, the basic genesis was, let's say, I was very bored. Um, so somewhat more seriously, I've been running these play by posts for years. I've been running kind of campaigns and so on. And as you may have picked up, when I do things, I tend to kind of go heavily into them.
Hmm.
So I kind of so essentially someone perhaps kind of long saying like, Michael, you should like try and like publish this, or like you should try and like actually like turn this into a setting. And I was like, maybe, except the way I was doing all of those involved a lot of how shall we phrase this delicately? Inspiration from sources to which I do not own copyright, which is fine when you're doing your own home game. But it's like, yeah, if I'm going to
Right,
publish,
right,
if
right,
I
right.
try and publish this thing, the only question is whether I get sued by Game Workshop or Wizard of the Coast first. Okay,
Mm,
so
mm,
let's
mm.
make my own thing from scratch, from anew. And I was like, okay, and thus the Luminant Age was born. Basically, Michael
Got
was
it.
bored and like, I can do things, I can make things. So there you go.
So, how would you characterize Luminant Age for folks looking at all the various Pathfinder Second Edition campaigns that might be available? What flavor is this, and who is it for?
Hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to describe it in, let's say, three different ways right now, because I think that that will be a useful kind of sense. So, first, long ago and far away, in the world of Ivern, there was this grand civilization, the great people, and they built an age of wonders and of marvels. They built towers to reach to the sky. They built palaces in the night. They built cities so vast that an eagle could fly for a day and a night and not reach the borders. They were powerful and they were proud and not perhaps overwhelming in their kindness. They built mines that knew all the wonders of the world, and they built slaves and servitors, pulling them from their cauldrons to live. Until one fine day, without warning, with no omen, no augury, the sun went dark. The stars went out, and all was cold, and all was darkness. And this great civilization fell, because all their wonders and marvels could not keep them when there was no sun. Some little while passed, and in the sky appeared three new heavenly bodies, what the few survivors would call the moons. And then from the ruins, from a few bunkers, from hidden places deep beneath, some tiny sliver of humanity emerged and began to rebuild. Now turn the page. 1400 years have passed, and empires have risen and fallen. We have city states. We have the hustle and the bustle of civilization. Everything is happening. And nowhere is it happening more than in the city of Oricor. There you have inventions crawling out of workshops. You have students discussing these latest philosophies, newest ideas. Everything seems possible. Everything seems like we can do this. There is a new world in the offing, a new age in the offing, a luminant age, and it's being born here in Oricor. So that's one kind of, shall we say, framing. A second framing. So the luminant age is a weird fantasy swashbuckler set in this sort of post-apocalyptic kind of setting where once there was this, we shall say, kind of high science fiction, high cyberpunk society, which went dramatically and quite epically kaput. We now advance to kind of the afterwards, and in the ruins of this once great technological civilization, you have kind of new societies, new civilizations have emerged, and frankly have kind of just moved on. They've got new things to worry about.
Hmm.
The main setting of the main setting thing is Oracle, which is this sort of this merchant republic set on a set, yeah, set on a set, and I'm supposed to be a writer. Yeah. A merchant republic positioned on a group of derricks in the middle of an ocean, which
Mm-hmm.
is shows a kind of New York meets Venice. It's the place
Mm-hmm.
where kind of you got the universities, you got like the new ideas, and it's basically where this sort of Renaissance slash almost industrial revolution that we call the Luminant Age is happening. Our protagonists are our players are this motley crew of rogues, rascals, and ne'er do wells who are trying to kind of make a living in this hustling and bustling little city in hopes that kind of by hook or by crook, they go from being nobodies to being somebodies. Kind of while like any campaign setting, you can basically do like anything you like with it. In kind of the archetypal campaign frame, the idea is very much that our heroes, our protagonists, will, as they kind of gain in power and status, they will be able to actually change how Oracore, and for that matter, how the Luminant Age takes shape. That it won't be easy, it won't be quick, but our heroes can kind of become Iverin's kind of George Washington or Martin Luther, they're Thomas More or they're Niccolo Machiavelli, and that they have the chance to step forward and make a stamp on history, as it were. That's the second framework. So, third framework. Luminant Age is, as noted, a weird fantasy swashbuckler. So, what do we actually mean by that? So, by weird fantasy, this means that we are trying to create a setting which is different from kind of the classic elves and dragons fantasy, which everyone is
Mm-hmm.
very well familiar with. Now, I have nothing against elves and dragons fantasy. I've spent more years in it than I care to number. But by the same token, we're not going to be doing it better than the big guys. So
Mm-hmm.
instead, we are trying to kind of forge a setting which has different assumptions, different archetypes, different kind of core ideas. So let's say in kind of Luminant Age, we don't have elves or dwarves or kind of the classic fantasy assembly. Instead, you've got the four humanities. You've got the clay, who are human-ish, we shall say, in standard appeal. The horn, who are four-horned gargoyle types. The silk, who are kind of cat, moth, whiskery types. And the blood people, who are, shall we say, of generally ooze-like definition. We have, rather than kind of the standard pantheistic approach of kind of, again, the big guys, we have uh, varying kind of competing religions, all claiming to their own understanding of an infinite truth. We have technologies based on like what the locals call ichor, which is a lovely hallucinogenic acid which also blows up. So essentially, it's a setting where you could be, let's say, a four-horned gargoyle person toting around an acid spewing super soaker along with your best friends Cthulhu Nun and the Nano Wizard. So we're trying to kind of make this just a new dictionary, shall we say, of
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. And swashbuckler, what do you mean by swashbuckler? We're inspired a lot by things like Three Musketeers or Baroness or Ortiz, kind of the Scarlet Pimpernel. So kind of
Mm-hmm.
characters who are a bit larger than life, stylish, dramatic.
Okay. Got it.
An emphasis on not kind of on save the world approaches, but more interpersonal relationships, more kind of political intrigue, more kind of sneakery, shall we say, and just an outlook of something which might called kind of like humanistic cynicism. That the sort of idea that yes, people have all their flaws and foibles, but we still love them anyway. So, kind of three ways to sort of think about what is Luminant Age.
Nice. Yeah, I like your description of what it is. You know, when Andrew talked about it, I was very excited. I really enjoy the post-apocalyptic kind of settings and things, and I really I think it's neat the story that you've built of this earlier empire and its fall and kind of what's rising from the ashes.
Hmm?
I find that very exciting. Now you've released a couple of sections of this, right? Some different pieces of it. When might we expect like the whole thing start coming out and being pieced together? What's that? Do you have a schedule or timeline for that, or is it you're laughing? So
Okay, so all right. So at this time, we have kickstarted, finished, and released one product called Fauna of the Luminant Age, which is like a bestiary
Mhm,
expert. That thing's out and done, and you can buy it on our itch.io store. We are currently attempting to finish our second release, which is called Armaments of the Luminant Age, which
mhm.
is this equipment book. That thing is written and illustrated, and we have versions for both Pathfinder Second Edition and D&D Fifth Edition, and it is currently stuck in post production. So we're working on it, but when it'll actually be finished, excellent question. I'll let you know when I have an answer. Hopefully soon.
All right, okay. I was just
Uh,
wondering, you know,
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
wondering how things are going. So,
Past that, so our vague hope it was to do one more kind of intermediate design, probably something like Paragon's Luminant Age focused on characters, specifically on people.
mhm.
Probably some NPCs, probably some archetypes. Like we have the nanite archetype. We've got like a Commedia dell'arte style archetype. We have stuff like that. So that's good, but that can't happen until Armaments finishes up.
Right.
And then eventually, long term, the goal is to do a kind of the big book Kickstarter, which would be a Kickstarter for the entire book, which at this point is shaping up to probably be between 300 and 400 pages. We've got 100,000, no, 110,000 words written already. I'll put it this way: I'd like to have the big Kickstarter happening sometime around third or fourth quarter of 2023 with a
Mm-hmm.
release in the summer of 2024. That's the hope. Will it actually happen? At this point, I'm a little cautious about making promises.
Right.
Basically, the issue is, simply put, this is something which they're. and I can imagine like Ron Lundin right now is just watching this and laughing, but basically, it's actually kind of hard to put out a full product. Uh,
Okay.
In
Yeah.
the sense that not only is there just an awful lot of writing, but there is a lot of kind of production stuff which happens
Right.
in the background. Uh, Things like editing has to be figured out, like layout, I think, getting all like the art put together. So the one kind of consistent sort of thing I've noticed so far is that every time I set a kind of timeline, everything takes twice as long as I expect.
Oh, okay.
So
That's good to know. Yeah.
yeah, so hopefully sooner rather than later. I definitely feel like
Yeah.
we are past the halfway mark.
Right.
We're kind of the writing is much more done than not done.
Hmm.
We're building up our reservoir of art, but the other kind of complicating factor is that at the end of the day, I mean, not to be kind of too blunt about, but we all have day jobs or other kind of
Hmm.
responsibilities. So when kind of the decision comes, okay, do I work on on grading for my students or work on Luminant Age? I know what I want to do. I also know what I need to
Yes.
do to not get fired. So it's like,
Yeah.
I love you, Luminant Age, but daddy's got rent. So that's a complicating
Right.
factor.
No, I understand that. I have a project I should be writing on right now, as a matter of fact. And I have work I should be doing right now in preparation for classes
Yep.
in starting in next week. So it's like,
Been there, done
okay, I'll
that.
figure it out. Yes, yes. All right. Well, you have written an awful lot. What advice do you have for people interested in freelance writing and game design who have not honed their skills already and earned an advanced degree that entails a lot of research and writing?
Mm, okay, so I think a couple of things. So, from a writing perspective, I'd say the single biggest lesson is learn kind of how to write good enough and then be done with it.
Mm,
Something I see
I
a
like that.
lot in both the freelance sphere and, for that matter, in academia is kind of just extreme perfectionism, let's say. People who, for whom that this must be kind of like just the muses sing down, kind of Apollo pours inspiration into their ear. It's like, and that's great when you can get the inspiration, but sometimes the gift of the muses is like a little box which like spot cobwebs inside and like a thinking of you note card. So it's very important, I think, as a writer to learn to kind of just produce good enough writing on demand.
Hmm.
Not kind of when inspiration strikes, not when kind of like the stars align, but basically to be able to just sit down and tap, 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 and get something. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
you may be familiar with the same. In graduate school, there was a saying which went like
Yes.
this: a
Yes. I
good
know what the saying is.
dissertation is a finished dissertation. A
Yes,
great
exactly.
dissertation is a published dissertation. A perfect dissertation is neither. And same idea here. Learn kind
Yes.
of for writers, it's learn to do good enough and then call it done and move on. I'll also
Hmm.
note
Hmm.
that I've had writing where I was like sublimely inspired, and the writing where it's like, Daddy's got art commissions to pay for, and with very few exceptions, people can't tell the difference. Sadly,
Right.
that's one thing. As for freelance, I would basically say that freelancing is ultimately a job. It's a kind of job. It's a fun job. It's an enjoyable one. It's one we tend to like. But at the end of the day, it is a professional arrangement between you making a product and kind of the developer kind of commissioning you as like a temporary employee. And you need to kind of think about a little in that sense that ultimately you're trying to provide a product with, let's say, a minimum of fuss and bother. So just basic things like communication, professionalism, all those kind of things, they do matter. Like that, your writing can be the most amazing thing ever, but it also just matters kind of how you come across, professional standards, things like that. Kind of, it's a little bit grimly capitalistic, but well, that's life.
Yeah, I would agree a lot of that. It's interesting. Ryan and I talk about this quite a bit. I ask for advice. I'm aspiring to reach your level, so I'm at the I might have 50,000 words and I have like a dozen credits. So, I got a ways to go. I got a ways to go there. But that's one of the things that he has mentioned to me, having it good enough on time, doing what your developer asks you to do,
Yep.
so that they don't have to go and completely rewrite everything you turn in.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
awesome. Excellent. So I appreciate, honestly, I think you're the first person who has said, I've asked about 100 people the same thing, right? What advice do you have? I think you're the first person that has said, don't write to perfection, write to good enough. So
Well, that is the Michael philosophy. Yes.
yeah, no, I think it's, I'm working on something now and I find myself starting off with, this is going to be perfect. And it always morphs into, this is pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's on time, hits all the paces, it's on the word count. That's
Yep.
good enough for me. So,
I think the thing I think is that
so
we kind of as writers or that I think artists or whatever, there's always this imagined product, this imagined thing in our minds, which will
yes,
always be perfect because kind of, it's the imagined thing. But our skills are not perfect. Once we kind of bring that from the around the mind to like actual concrete existence, compromises have to be made. So
very good. So what's next for Michael? I know you're working on Luminant Age, but are there any other cool things that you're working on now that you can talk about?
cool things that I'm working on, yes. That I can talk about, no. Uh,
Okay.
well, let's see. So, I mean, I continue to work for Paizo, so not perhaps to the heights of when I was working on Dark Archive, but
Right.
I've got some assignments kind of I'm working on these days. Some which are in the pipeline. I don't really expect that to change. And I am still working on kind of Luminant Age, and that's basically enough to keep me pretty busy.
Yes.
Once I finish Luminant Age, who knows? The world will be my oyster, but
Yes.
that won't be for a while yet.
Yeah. Do you travel to any conventions? I would love to meet you in person, but I don't think I'll make it to China. So are
Um,
there any conventions you?
so I have. um, so here in China, the way for obvious reasons have not been doing much traveling for the last few years.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so I haven't gone to any conventions largely because most of the ones which do happen in the states during times when school is still in session around here. And how to put it delicately, I love you guys, but it is a like 26-hour flight from Shenzhen to
Right.
like Boston, and I don't love you that much. So possibly during the summer, I may someday look into things when I can actually travel back for the summer.
Right.
So
Right.
someday, hopefully. And I mean,
All right.
I don't expect to be teaching in China forever. So who knows? We'll see.
Yeah. We will see. So Michael, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate you weathering the camera as well. I know you've have an eye injury
Yeah.
that's bothering you, and you've done very quite well with it. I will say,
Uh,
but I want to point it out for people that
yeah.
that you're it's a
Well,
little sleepy because it's bothering you. It's not because that's how you are.
no, I'm normally much more photogenic, but basically,
Well, you're good. You look good.
I am the unique person. Like, everyone here in China is getting COVID right now, but me, no. I'm a rebel. I'm an iconoclast. I have managed to catch the one non-COVID virus going around the damn country right now, which means that yeah, I can like hi. That's all I can see. I will. Yeah, this is why like so yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you putting up, and I think the video is fine. I don't think anyone will notice, but I just want to say it just in case. All
Sounds
right.
good.
Well,
Okay.
have a great rest of your day here because it's 11 o'clock in the morning, or now noon for you, and it's evening
Yep.
for me. Have a great New Year as well.
Yes, Happy New Year to you and to all of your many listeners and viewers. Have a there.